On a quiet night in New Jersey, a 5-year-old boy vanished without a trace. On a warm spring night in 1991, in the small town of Sayreville, New Jersey, the lights of a local carnival flickered against the sky, casting long shadows over the crowds below. Children laughed, rides creaked, music drifted over the fields. It was the kind of night that felt safe, ordinary, harmless. But somewhere in the middle of that bright, chaotic space, a quiet tragedy was beginning to unfold, one that would haunt New Jersey for decades. On the night of May 25th, 1991, the Sayreville Police Department received a frantic call from a young mother at a crowded local carnival. Her voice trembled as she told officers that her 5-year-old son was missing. Within minutes, the flashing lights of patrol cars cut through the darkness, and officers fanned out across the carnival grounds, searching every ride, booth, tent, and open field. The carnival had been busy. Hundreds of families had come out to enjoy the warm spring evening, according to the mother. Michelle Lajinsky, she said she and Timmy were standing near one of the rides when she briefly turned away. When she looked back, he was gone. That was her story. Officers pressed for details, trying to determine how far the boy could have wandered in such a short time. Almost immediately, however, certain parts of Michelle's account left investigators uneasy. Her explanations shifted each time she repeated them. One moment she said he vanished near a game booth. Another moment she described him walking toward a ride. Police needed clarity, but they received only uncertainty. Despite this, officers launched a massive search. They swept the carnival area, called in volunteers, brought in dogs, and alerted nearby towns. 4 hours. They searched drainage, ditches, wooded edges, and open grass fields. Timmy was small, shy, and easily frightened. If he were hiding, the dogs should have found him if he had wandered off. Someone should have seen him, but no trace of him was discovered that night. As dawn approached, an unsettling truth began to settle over the investigation. This was no ordinary missing child case. Before the sun rose, detectives asked Michelle to come down to the station for further questioning. She appeared anxious, shifting between panic and exhaustion, wiping her eyes repeatedly. They asked again how Timmy disappeared. This time, her story changed dramatically. She said a woman she knew, an old babysitter, had approached her at the carnival and taken Timmy. Later, she said 2 men had been involved. The details grew stranger with each retelling. The descriptions of the kidnappers were vague, inconsistent, and nearly impossible to verify. Officers checked every name she mentioned, but none of the people she described had been at the carnival. Not a single witness confirmed seeing anyone take Timmy. Detectives quickly learned that on the morning of the carnival, Michelle had told people she might bring Timmy, but several friends later revealed she had also told them she didn't plan to take him at all. Life at home, however, was unstable. Michelle Lajinsky was a young single mother with a history of job instability and frequent moves. She had no significant criminal history, but those around her described her as overwhelmed, stressed, and often struggling to manage both work and childcare. While there were no formal reports of abuse, Michelle often relied heavily on babysitters and friends to watch Timmy, sometimes leaving him with near strangers when her work hours shifted. Then, nearly a year later, on April 23, 1992, a man walking near an industrial marsh area in Edison, New Jersey, discovered a small sneaker lying in the tall grass. It was a child's shoe, worn and dirty, but still intact. Police were called immediately. When investigators arrived, the discovery led them deeper into the marshy, remote, swampy area far from the carnival grounds. Buried beneath layers of mud, brush, and debris, they found skeletal remains. Forensic testing confirmed everyone's worst fear. The remains belonged to Timothy Wiltsey. The discovery changed everything. The condition of the site told investigators the body had not been placed there recently. The location was too remote for a child to reach alone, too difficult for a stranger to access unnoticed. Whoever placed Timmy's body in that marsh had taken time to hide him, selecting a spot far from public view, but familiar enough for someone local to find. Detectives immediately refocused on Michelle. Search warrants were executed for her home. Interviews were repeated. A pattern emerged. Around the time of Timmy's disappearance, Michelle had abruptly quit her job, canceled appointments, and made statements to friends indicating stress and frustration with parenting. None of this proved guilt, but circumstantial pieces were beginning to align. A blanket found near Timmy's remains matched one from Michelle's apartment. Emmet was the exact matching pattern and fabric from a set only she owned. She could not explain it. She said she didn't know how it got there. Her explanations grew increasingly evasive. Investigators believed they had their suspect, but building a murder case without eyewitnesses, without a confession, with no direct evidence tying Michelle to the Marsh prosecutors, were forced to wait. 2 decades passed. Michelle moved away, remarried, had more children, and lived quietly, but the case never left the minds of detectives. The blanket, the location, Michelle's shifting stories. And everything was reevaluated in 2014. A cold case team presented their findings to a grand jury. After 23 years, Michelle Laginski was charged with the murder of her son, Timmy. The trial began in 2016. Prosecutors argued Michelle didn't plan to kill Timmy, but panicked after something happened. Then created multiple false stories about kidnappers, masked men, and strangers to mislead police. They highlighted how she changed her account repeatedly and took investigators to several false locations, and she was found guilty and sentenced. But in 2021, the case was reopened. The defense argued there was no proof she killed Timmy, no cause of death, no forensic evidence, and a marsh that anyone could access. They insisted the case was built on suspicion, not facts. Michelle's conviction was overturned, and she was released from prison. 5:45 a.m. Security guard Stephen Crawford unlocked the massive wooden doors of the Stanford Memorial Church and walked into stillness. Then he saw something so horrifying he stumbled backward. A young woman lay dead near the altar. Her body had been attacked with a knife. Her clothing had been removed. Her legs had been positioned. A candle had been placed between her breasts. Another was inserted inside her. Each detail looked purposeful, deliberate, and ritualistic. Her name was Arlis Perry, a 19-year-old newlywed who had been living on campus with her husband just 2 months. The place of worship had become a crime scene, and this case would haunt investigators for more than 40 years. Just hours earlier, Arlis had walked into the church alive. On October 12, 1974, she and her husband, Bruce Perry, had a small disagreement. Nothing unusual. Bruce was having trouble with the air pressure in their car tires. Arlis suggested they pray instead of arguing. She walked toward the Stanford Memorial Church and never came home. Witnesses later confirmed seeing her inside the church around 11:30 p.m. She was praying quietly alone, sitting near the front pews. A fellow student entered and another left, all saw her alive. But at some point after midnight, danger entered that church, because when the final visitor left and the doors were locked at 12:10 a.m., Arlis Perry was still inside, meaning the killer was inside with her. Within hours, police zeroed in on the man who found the body, Stephen Crawford, the campus security guard. There were questions. Just hours earlier, Arlis had walked into the church alive. Why had he reported hearing no unusual noises during the night? Why did he say the door was locked when he first checked at 2 a.m., then say it was slightly open at 5:45 a.m.? Many investigators quietly believed Crawford was lying, but Crawford denied any involvement. There was no physical evidence tying him to the killing, and the case grew cold. Her body showed signs of a brutal sexual attack, but forensic science in 1974 was too primitive to identify a killer from DNA. Instead, detectives focused on the staging, the candle placed between her breasts, the candle violating her, the position of her body, the meticulous arrangement of her arms and legs. The unusual posing fueled rumors of satanic rituals, cults, and even targeted religious murder. None of these theories had evidence, but they took on lives of their own. Even seasoned investigators said later, it was the most disturbing crime scene I had ever witnessed. Arlis's husband, Bruce, was quickly interviewed. He had an alibi. He was in their dorm room and took a polygraph test, which he passed. He was cleared, but the image of Arlis's staged body remained burned into America's memory. Her parents called her a deeply religious girl who wanted to help people. The idea that someone targeted her inside a church felt unreal. She had moved from North Dakota to begin a new life with her husband. Weeks later, she was brutally murdered in what should have been a sanctuary. Detectives interviewed dozens of students, professors, and locals. Years passed, leads dried up. The killer was still free. That suspect was still Stephen Crawford, the security guard, but suspicion wasn't evidence. And without DNA testing, the case remained one of California's most mysterious. Fast forward to the early 2000s, forensic science had transformed. DNA could now solve cases once considered impossible. The Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office reopened the Arlis Perry case and began retesting evidence from the crime scene. They found semen on her clothing. This time, science could speak, but the sample didn't match any known offenders. It went into CODIS, the National DNA Database. Only one thing was missing: a suspect's DNA to compare it to. Years ticked by then. In 2016 to 2018, cold case detectives tried again. They gathered DNA from past suspects. The biggest concern remained the original one. What if the killer had been there the whole time? In 2018, detectives obtained a search warrant to collect DNA from only one man. Former Stanford security guard Stephen Crawford. He had been the last known person with access to the church. He had found the body. He had given inconsistent statements, and he had been in the building that night. Detectives arrived at his apartment in San Jose on June 28th. What happened next was shocking. As officers knocked and announced the warrant, Stephen Crawford retreated into his bedroom and shot himself. Police entered and found a note on his desk. DNA tests soon confirmed what investigators had suspected for 44 years. The semen recovered from Arlis Perry's clothing was a match to Stephen Crawford. The case was solved, but the answers raised more questions. Did he follow Arlis into the church? Did he wait for her to be alone? Did he use a security role to trap her? Why stage her body disturbingly? We may never know. Crawford took the truth with him. Subscribe for more true crime stories.